The shrill, unbroken tone of the flatline cut through the operating room. Dr. Julian Croft, his face a mask of fury under the surgical lights, ripped the useless endovascular catheter from the artery. Blood, dark and sudden, welled up. Suction. "Are you decorative, Sharma?" he snarled, not even looking at the rookie nurse, Anya, whose hands were already there, anticipating him. On the fluoroscope, the ghostly image told the story, a deployed stent graft, mangled against the jagged edge of decades-old shrapnel. The aortic wall was shredded. Croft watched the patient's pressure crash to zero and slammed a bloody hemostat onto the steel tray with a final, defeated clatter. The sound echoed in the sudden, sterile silence. "It's over," he declared, pulling off his gloves. "The fragment made a graft impossible. There's nothing more we can do. Call it." His team slumped, the energy draining from the room. But in the background, Anya Sharma didn't look away from the monitor. Her expression wasn't one of defeat. It was one of grim, absolute recognition. She knew this wound. And she knew the man on the table wasn't going to die today. The only sound in operating room 3 was the monotonous, soul-crushing B-flat of the flatline alarm. It was the sound of failure. Dr. Julian Croft, his godlike authority shattered, ripped the sterile blue gown from his body and threw it into the biohazard bin with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. He was a conductor whose orchestra had just imploded, and he was searching for an instrument to blame. His gaze fell on the massive, state-of-the-art imaging arm of the artist's Zygo system, currently displaying the ghostly, catastrophic image of the failed procedure. He pointed a gloved finger at it, not for his team, but for himself, an act of justification. "Look at it," he commanded, his voice tight with a rage that had to go somewhere. Dr. Lena Petrova, his fellow, a woman whose ambition was as sharp and sterile as the scalpels on the Mayo stand, stepped closer. Her expression was a masterclass in sycophantic commiseration. "It was impossible, Doctor," she murmured, her voice just loud enough to be an echo of his authority. The imaging couldn't predict the degree of aortic integration. Croft seized on the word. "Integration? It's not integrated, Petrova, it's petrified. Decades of fibrotic scarring have fused that piece of Viet Song shrapnel to the adventitia. It's become a part of him, a calcified tumor on the aortic arch." He gestured angrily at the screen. "We deploy the TEVR graft, we expect it to expand and seal the rupture. Instead, it hits that fragment. The metal acts like a razor, shredding the fabric of the graft and further perforating the aortic wall. We try to reposition, we risk transecting the aorta entirely. Try a traditional open procedure? We have to cross-clamp between the carotid and the subclavian, but the fragment is nestled right against the takeoff of the spinal artery. One slip, 1 millimeter of movement, and he's a quadriplegic. If he doesn't bleed out on the table first." He paced the lead-lined room, a predator trapped in a cage of his own making. Metropolitan General wasn't a hospital, it was a brand. Its reputation was built on men like Croft, men who didn't fail. And the man on the table wasn't just any patient, he was General Marcus Thorne, a living monument whose life was now draining into a suction canister. Anya Sharma stood by the perfusion machine, her gloved hands resting lightly on its cool surface. She hadn't moved. Her quiet presence was a stark contrast to the simmering fury of Croft and the anxious energy of the rest of the team. They saw a medical impossibility. Anya saw a memory. 3 hours earlier. The surgical briefing in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. The CT angiogram was on the main screen, a complex, three-dimensional map of Thorne's chest. Croft had swept a laser pointer across it, his confidence absolute, asterisk. Asterisk a straightforward TEVR, he had announced. We go in through the femoral, deploy the stent graft, cover the pseudoaneurysm. He'll be on the floor by morning. Questions? Asterisk. Asterisk silence. No one questioned Dr. Croft. But Anya, reviewing the chart on her tablet, saw something else. A subtle, almost imperceptible haze of hyperdensity around the shrapnel fragment on the axial view. A faint pattern of speculation in the calcification, asterisk. Asterisk she had felt a cold dread in her stomach. Hesitantly, she raised her hand, asterisk. Asterisk Croft's eyes barely registered her. Yes, nurse. He didn't know her name, asterisk. Asterisk Sharma, sir. Her voice was quiet but clear. On slice 147 of the CTA, the calcification pattern around the fragment. It appears spiculated, and there's no clear facial plane between it and the aortic wall. It suggests deep, chronic integration. A standard endograft might catch on it. It could shred. Asterisk. Asterisk Dr. Petrova had turned, a look of pure, undisguised contempt on her face. Are you offering a radiological interpretation, nurse? She'd asked, her tone dripping with acid. Perhaps you'd like to scrub in and lead the procedure yourself? Asterisk. Asterisk A few of the residents had snickered. Croft had waved a dismissive hand. The aneurysm wall is stable enough to support the graft. Thank you for your input, Sharma. Let's stick to nursing, shall we? Asterisk. Now, in the exact scenario she had quietly predicted was displayed in catastrophic detail on the monitor. There was no triumph in it, only a profound, aching sadness. Croft's arrogance hadn't just been insulting, it had been lethal. He had looked at the map but refused to see the dragon hiding in plain sight. Get the administrator on the phone, Croft ordered the circulating nurse, his voice flat. He was shifting from surgeon to bureaucrat, the final stage of grief in this temple of medicine. Tell him we did everything we could, but pre-existing trauma made the patient a non-viable candidate for repair. Use those words. Non-viable candidate. Petrova nodded, already composing the post-mortem report in her head, ensuring every sentence exonerated her mentor and, by extension, herself. A tragic, unavoidable outcome, Doctor. Anya watched them. She saw the team begin the grim, practiced ritual of shutting down. The scrub tech began to count her instruments. The anesthesiologist, his job of keeping the patient alive now moot, prepared to turn off the ventilators. They were all moving on, accepting the verdict handed down by their chief. But Anya wasn't looking at Croft or Petrova. Her eyes were fixed on the arterial line monitor. A perfect, unwavering flat line. 0/0. To them, it was an ending. An electronic tombstone. To her, it was something else entirely. It was a starting point. She knew the calcification pattern not from a textbook, but from the gritty, blood-soaked floor of AC-17 flying over the Hindu Kush. She knew the way shrapnel could weld itself to living tissue. She had seen this exact wound before. And this exact man. And she remembered the promise she had made to a younger, stronger Marcus Thorne as she had held pressure on this very injury with her bare hands. I'll get you home, sir. It was a promise she still intended to keep. Dr. Croft stripped off his bloody gloves with a sharp snap, dropping them into the biohazard bin. The act was one of finality, of a king abdicating a lost throne. He unfastened his gown, letting it fall into the waiting hands of a circulating nurse without a glance. His focus was already beyond the dead man on his table, it was on the narrative. Lena, he said, his voice low but carrying the full weight of his authority. Dr. Petrova was at his side instantly, a shadow eager to receive the light of his attention. When we brief the family, and later, the press, the language is critical. Unsurvivable injury. A post-traumatic pseudoaneurysm of this complexity, complicated by the shrapnel, it was a ticking time bomb from 40 years ago. We made a heroic effort. Every advanced technique was deployed. Understand? Perfectly, Doctor, Petrova replied, her tone a seamless blend of reverence and efficiency. Heroic effort against an unsurvivable wound. I'll make sure the notes reflect that precisely. They were crafting an obituary, not reviewing a case. To them, the general was already a memory, a complex problem that had regrettably proven insoluble. Their failure was being reframed as a valiant struggle against the inevitable, a way to protect the hospital's sterling reputation and, more importantly, Croft's. Anya heard their words, but they were distant, like a broadcast from another world. Her world was a 6-inch screen displaying a cascade of failing numbers. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Evans, had already begun titrating down the norepinephrine drip. With no blood pressure to support, the potent vasopressors were pointless. The ventilator still sighed, a lonely, mechanical ghost in the silent room, but Evans's hand was already hovering over the controls to switch it to standby. But Anya saw something. A flicker. A ghost in the machine. On the monitor, the arterial line read a dismal 35/20 mmHg. It was a pressure incompatible with life, the dying ebb of a tide that would not return. Croft and Petrova had seen it, dismissed it, and moved on. But Anya's eyes weren't on the A-line. They were on the line just above it, the CVP, the central venous pressure. It was a subtle indicator, often prone to artifact, measuring the pressure in the vena cava, near the heart's right atrium. While the arterial pressure had cratered, the CVP, which should have been falling to 0, was doing the opposite. It had been 12. Now it was 14. Now 15. A slow, insidious climb. To a textbook surgeon, it was noise in a dying system. Agonal flutter. But to a SOST medic who had kept men alive with nothing but field dressings and sheer will, it was a signal flare in the dark. The expanding hematoma around the aorta, temporarily contained by the body's own desperate clotting, wasn't static. It was growing, pressing on the superior vena cava, squeezing the life out of the great vessels before it even entered the heart. He wasn't just hypotensive, he was being strangled from the inside. She moved from her station at the back of the room, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. She approached Petrova, who was busy arranging the discarded instruments on a sterile tray, her expression one of polite impatience. "Dr. Petrova," Anya said, her voice quiet but clear. Petrova didn't look up. "What is it, nurse?" "We're closing." "The CVP," Anya said, nodding toward the monitor bank. "It's trending up. Against the falling map. The hematoma might be expanding, causing a tamponade effect." Petrova finally looked at her, her eyes cold with annoyance. She glanced at the monitor, saw the number 15, and scoffed. "It's artifact, Sharma. The heart's failing, the system is collapsing. Everything is artifact now. Go help with the final count." It was a dismissal, a clear signal to return to her place in the rigid hospital hierarchy. Anya held her ground. Her heart was pounding, a frantic drum against the calm facade she projected. "With respect, doctor, it's not artifact. The waveform is clean. It's a classic Beck's triad picture, just without a visible pericardial effusion. He's exsanguinating into the mediastinum, but it's contained for now. It's compressing his right atrium. We have a minute, maybe two, before it ruptures completely." Petrova's face hardened. She straightened up, her slight frame radiating menace. "Are you questioning Dr. Croft's assessment? Are you, a nurse, lecturing me on cardiothoracic hemodynamics? You have 5 seconds to return to your station before I write you up for insubordination." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. But Anya was no longer in the pristine, political theater of Metropolitan General. In her mind, the floor was vibrating, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and blood. She was back on that C-17, and her patient was dying. And then it happened. Just as she predicted, the CVP number on the monitor suddenly spiked to 25, a desperate peak of pressure, and then plummeted to 1. Simultaneously, the faint, flickering arterial pressure of 35/20 vanished. The green line went utterly, completely flat. Not the slow fade of a dying heart, but a sudden, catastrophic drop to 0. A red alarm blared for a second before the system, registering no pressure at all, silenced itself. The contained bomb had just detonated. The pseudoaneurysm had burst. All the blood that should have been in his circulatory system was now flooding his chest cavity. Dr. Evans swore under his breath. What the hell was that? The scrub tech froze, a scalpel in her hand. Everyone turned to the monitors, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Croft, who had been halfway to the door to deliver his carefully crafted speech, stopped. He turned, his brow furrowed in irritation. What is all the commotion? The man has expired. Turn off the alarms and let's have some dignity here. He strode back toward the table, his eyes flicking to the flat A line. See? He's gone. As I said. This was the moment. The point of no return. Anya stepped past the stunned Dr. Petrova, planting herself directly in Croft's path. She looked the chief of cardiothoracic surgery directly in the eye, her quiet demeanor replaced by an intensity that made him physically recoil. All the deference, all the training to be invisible, evaporated in the fire of her certainty. "Doctor, you're wrong," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It was as flat and final as the line on the monitor. Croft's face contorted with rage. "What did you just say to me?" Anya gestured to the screen, her hand steady. "He wasn't dead 5 minutes ago. He just died now. There's a difference." Croft's laugh was a short, barking sound of utter disbelief. "A window? You're a nurse. What are you going to do, pray him back to life?" Anya didn't flinch. "I'm going to save him," she stated, her words sharp and precise. "Induce deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. We stop his circulation entirely, creating a bloodless field. It gives us a window to perform a thoracic field clamp and suture the graft directly, bypassing the shrapnel. This is the moment the system is challenged by the one person it was designed to ignore. If you root for the underdog, for the quiet expert who finally steps out of the shadows, then hit that subscribe button. You are not going to want to miss what happens when a nurse shows the chief of surgery how it's done." For a moment, the only sound in the operating room was the soft, rhythmic hiss of the ventilator pumping air into lungs that no longer used it. Croft's fury was a palpable force, a wave of heat and pressure that should have sent Anya stumbling backward. He advanced on her, his sterile clogs squeaking on the linoleum, a predator cornered in his own domain. Dr. Petrova, ever the opportunist, rushed to his side. "Sir, she's clearly in shock," Petrova said, her voice dripping with false concern. "The stress, she doesn't know what she's saying." "Nurse, step away from the table." Croft ignored Petrova. His eyes, visible above his surgical mask, were narrowed slits of incandescent rage. "You have 10 seconds to explain what you meant by that delusional statement before I have you thrown out of this hospital and your nursing license revoked for gross insubordination." Anya didn't flinch. Her gaze was locked on his, a sea of calm against his storm. She had faced down RPGs and the frantic, desperate energy of a mass casualty event. A surgeon's ego, however massive, was a manageable threat. "He is now in a state of no-flow ischemia," she stated, her voice as precise and cold as a scalpel. "But for the last hour, he was perfusing. Hypovolemic, hypotensive, but perfusing. His brain and organs were receiving oxygen, however limited. You haven't declared him dead, doctor. You've given up. There's a difference." Croft laughed, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Given up? You ignorant girl, look at this." He jabbed a gloved finger toward the fluoroscopy screen, where the ghost-like image of Thorne's aorta still glowed. The shrapnel is fused to the adventitia of the aortic root, millimeters from the ostium of the right coronary artery. One wrong move and we shred the aorta. A cross-clamp is impossible. A stent graft is impossible. Your so-called difference is academic. The man is dead. A standard cross-clamp is impossible, Anya corrected him. Her confidence was absolute, unnerving. You can't clamp between the fragment and the heart. So you don't. She moved to the head of the table, her movements fluid and purposeful. You take him colder. Much colder. You initiate deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. The anesthesiologist, a weary man named Dr. Evans who had seen everything, looked up from his station, his eyes widening. DHCA? On a trauma patient with a ruptured aorta? That's theoretical. It's not, Anya said, her voice cutting through the doubt. You exsanguinate the patient into the bypass reservoir, drop core temperature to 18 degrees Celsius. You stop all circulation. You get maybe 45 minutes of total arrest before the risk of brain damage becomes unacceptable. It gives you a bloodless, motionless field. No pressure, no flow. You can work directly on the aortic root without the risk of exsanguination or tearing the vessel. Croft stared at her as if she had started speaking in tongues. That's insane. The rewarming shock alone would kill him. We don't have the cannulation sites prepared. We don't have fem-fem cannulation for bypass, retrograde cerebral perfusion through the superior vena cava to protect the brain during arrest, Anya recited, as if reading from a textbook she'd memorized years ago. Then you open the chest fully, go transeptal, and resect the pseudoaneurysm under direct visualization. You dissect the shrapnel free from the adventitia, then suture a pericardial patch or a small Dacron graft. It's a field technique. A thoracic field clamp, we called it. High risk, high yield. The room was silent. Petrova looked from Anya to Croft, her mouth agape. The scrub nurse held a clamp, frozen mid-motion. The sheer, detailed audacity of the plan, coming from a quiet junior nurse, had shattered the OR's reality. Croft finally found his voice, shaking with a mixture of fury and disbelief. A field technique? What field? A nursing school symposium? Where did you read about this absurdity? This was the final piece. The one that would either see her thrown out or given the helm. Anya's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of memory in her dark eyes. I didn't read it, Doctor, she said softly. I've done it. I served in the 720th Special Tactics Group. I was a SOST medic. She looked down at the still form of the general, her voice now imbued with a fierce, protective loyalty. I've seen this wound before because I was there when he got it. I'm the one who packed him and kept him alive long enough to get to Landstuhl. This soldier is coming home. The revelation landed like a stun grenade. A SOST medic. One of the most elite, highly trained combat medics in the world, operating at a level far beyond any civilian paramedic and many physicians. They were ghosts, legends whispered about in trauma circles. Just then, the doors to the OR swung open. A man in a tailored suit, his face pale and tight with anxiety, strode in. It was Administrator Thompson, the hospital's chief executive. What in God's name is going on in here? He demanded, his eyes darting from the flatlined monitor to Croft's furious face. I have senators calling. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is on my private line. Dr. Croft, why hasn't time of death been called? Croft tore his eyes away from Anya, his professional mask slipping back into place. Mr. Thompson, we did everything we could. It's a not-survivable injury. I was about to. He's wrong, Anya said, her voice clear and strong, cutting Croft off. Thompson's head snapped toward her. Who is this? He asked, bewildered. She's a nurse suffering a psychotic break, Croft spat. She's the person who says she can save him, Dr. Evans, the anesthesiologist, interjected quietly from his corner. He had seen enough arrogance in his career to recognize it, and enough quiet competence to know when to bet on it. Thompson looked at Anya, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the fire in her eyes, the absolute certainty in her posture. He was a man of risk and numbers, of PR and politics. A dead national hero was a disaster. A dead national hero who died because his star surgeon gave up while a combat medic who'd saved him once before was in the room begging to try again. That was a career-ending, hospital-destroying catastrophe. He had only one choice. Dr. Croft, Thompson said, his voice trembling slightly but firm. You are to stand down and provide this nurse with whatever assistance she requires. The silence that followed was heavier than death. Croft looked as if Thompson had physically struck him. You cannot be serious, Croft hissed. You would hand over my operating room, my patient, to a nurse? This is a mockery of medicine. It's my funeral. No, doctor, Thompson replied, his voice hardening into steel. If he dies on this table after you've already given up, it's a tragedy. If he dies on this table while she's trying to save him, it's a heroic effort. But if he dies because you stood in her way, it's your funeral. Croft stared, his jaw working silently behind his mask. He looked at Anya, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. With a gesture of theatrical disgust, he ripped his bloody gloves off and threw them into a biohazard bin. "Fine," he snarled, backing away from the table. "This is your funeral." Anya didn't even watch him go. Her eyes were on the monitors, her mind already deep into the complex sequence of the procedure. The weight of the general's life, of her past, and of the entire hospital's future settled onto her shoulders. She took a deep, steadying breath. "Dr. Evans," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from her before. "Let's get him cold. Begin full bypass and start the cooling circuit. Take him down to 18 degrees. Now." The order hung in the air, a blade cutting through the thick atmosphere of failure and despair. For a moment, the entire operating room was frozen. Dr. Evans, the anesthesiologist, a man with 30 years of experience, looked from the unassuming nurse to the furious, deposed chief of surgery, his hands hovering over the controls of the cardiopulmonary bypass machine. It was a machine he had operated thousands of times, but never on the command of a nurse, and certainly not to induce an elective state of clinical death. "Nurse Sharma," he began, his voice a hesitant rumble. Anya didn't turn. Her focus was absolute, a laser beam connecting her mind to the general's failing physiology displayed on the bank of monitors. "Doctor, every second we debate, his brain is losing perfusion. The aortic wall is dissecting further. We have minutes, perhaps less. I need bypass and cooling. Now." The hospital administrator, still standing by the door, gave Evans a sharp, definitive nod. That was all it took. The chain of command had been shattered and reforged in a single, desperate moment. A switch was flipped. Decades of training and protocol took over the team. The scrub nurse, who had been ready to pack up, began laying out fresh instruments with swift, silent efficiency. The perfusionist, a young man named Ben, confirmed the cannulation lines were secure. Dr. Evans's hands, no longer hesitant, danced across his console. "Bypass initiated," Evans announced, his voice now crisp and professional. "Flow rate at 5 liters per minute. Commencing active cooling." A low hum intensified as the bypass machine's heat exchanger kicked in. The general's blood, diverted from his body, was now being pumped through a circuit that was actively chilling it before returning it to his system. It was a terrible, beautiful, and profoundly unnatural process. "Croft, what is she doing?" Petrova whispered, her voice laced with a horrified fascination. They stood near the back wall, pariahs in their own theater. "This is madness. She's going to freeze-kill him." Croft didn't answer. His arms were crossed, his body rigid. He was watching every move Anya made, his eyes narrowed, waiting for the catastrophic mistake that would vindicate him. He was witnessing a mutiny, and his silence was the promise of a brutal reckoning. Anya ignored them completely. She was a conductor bringing a complex orchestra to a terrifying crescendo. "Call out the esophageal temp every 2 degrees, she ordered. "Ben, watch your gas pressures. I want to see the EEG as we cool." "Temperature 35 degrees Celsius, Evans called. The rhythm on the main cardiac monitor began to slow. The sharp, panicked peaks of tachycardia eased into a steadier, but weakening, beat. 33 degrees. Anya moved to the head of the table, her gloved hands gently palpating the general's neck, feeling the faint, cooling pulse of his carotid artery. "His heart is fighting the cold," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "It won't for long. 31 degrees. We have atrial fibrillation." The green line on the monitor became a chaotic, jagged mess. A junior resident gasped. "He's an AFib." "It's expected," Anya stated calmly, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "The myocardium is becoming hyperexcitable from the cold. It's a sign we're on the right path. Keep cooling." Her confidence was unnerving. It wasn't the bravado of a gambler, it was the certainty of an expert who had walked this path before. The OR team, initially acting on the administrator's authority, now found themselves falling into rhythm with hers. They followed her commands without question, their movements becoming more fluid, more certain. They were no longer just Croft's team, they were hers. 29 degrees. 27. Ventricular fibrillation, Evans announced, his voice tight. The monitor now showed a frantic, useless quivering. The general was no longer pumping any blood on his own. He was entirely dependent on the machine. "She's killing him," Petrova hissed to Croft. "His heart has arrested. It's over." Croft's lips formed a thin, cruel line. This was it. The moment of failure. But Anya was unshaken. "He's fully dependent on bypass." "Perfect. Keep cooling. Faster, if you can." The temperature continued its relentless plunge. 25. 23. 21. The room grew colder, the collective breath of the team held in a state of suspended disbelief. The only sounds were the hum of the machine, the soft beeps of secondary monitors, and Anya's steady voice. "EEG activity is diminishing," the perfusionist reported, his eyes glued to his own screen. 19 degrees, Evans called out. "Almost there," Anya whispered. She held up a hand. "Perfusion, prepare to see circulation on my mark. 18 degrees Celsius. We're at target temp." The moment arrived. This was the precipice. "EEG is isoelectric," Ben confirmed, his voice trembling slightly. "No brain activity." The final, chaotic rhythm on the cardiac monitor degenerated, stretched, and then flattened into a single, piercing tone. "Flatline." The sound screamed through the operating room, a digital shriek of death. The green line that represented the general's life was now perfectly, unnervingly straight. The junior resident's eyes were wide with panic. He's gone. He's in asystole." Anya reached over and calmly silenced the alarm. The sudden quiet was more profound and terrifying than the noise it replaced. Every eye was on her. In the corner, a ghost of a smile touched Croft's lips. It was over. The nurse had killed him. Anya looked at the still, straight line on the monitor. She looked at the faces of the team, pale and shocked under the harsh surgical lights. Then she met Dr. Evans's gaze, her own eyes clear and resolute. "He's not gone," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "He's preserved." She turned her attention to the open chest cavity, where all circulation had now ceased. "Perfusionist, total circulatory arrest is initiated. Start the clock. We have 40 minutes. She picked up a scalpel. "Let's go to work." The world contracted to the space within General Thorne's chest. The ticking of the perfusionist's clock was a metronome counting down to either miracle or oblivion. 5 minutes gone. Silence reigned, thick and heavy. It was a surgeon's silence, a sacred vacuum where the only movements were the infinitesimally small, deliberate motions of steel in a gloved hand. The surgical field, normally a glistening crimson, was pale and almost dry. With the general's blood supply diverted and chilled, the tissues had a waxy, lifeless quality. It was like operating on a marble statue. Anya worked with a focus so absolute it seemed to generate its own gravity, pulling the attention of everyone in the room. Her movements were an economy of grace, each one purposeful, with no wasted energy. She was not the hesitant rookie who restocked supply closets, she was a master artisan at her forge. "Suction," she murmured, her voice calm and low. A resident, his hand shaking slightly, moved the tip into place. Gently. "The tissue is friable." Her target was the nexus of the problem, the jagged, half-centimeter shard of metal. It was fused to the outer wall of the aortic root by years of scar tissue, a metallic parasite clinging to the most vital vessel in the body. Worse, its sharpest point was aimed directly at the nearly invisible thread of the anterior spinal artery. A single millimeter of error, a slip of the forceps, would mean saving his heart but paralyzing him for life. This was why Croft had aborted. It wasn't surgery, it was diffusing a bomb woven from flesh and steel. Croft watched from the periphery, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of skepticism. Petrova stood beside him, her expression a mixture of morbid curiosity and a desperate hope for Anya's failure. This was a violation of every protocol, every hierarchy she had fought so hard to climb. "Microforceps," Anya commanded. The scrub nurse, now moving with a new, fluid certainty, slapped them into her palm. Anya didn't try to pull the shrapnel free. That would tear the aorta. Instead, she began a painstaking dissection, using the tips of her tenotomy scissors to snip away the fibrous adhesions, one microscopic connection at a time. It was a process of infinite patience. She was peeling the shrapnel from the vessel wall like separating 2 pages of a priceless book that had been glued together for decades. The clock ticked on. 15 minutes gone. "The aortic wall is thinner than I anticipated," she noted aloud, more for her own focus than for the team. "We'll need to buttress the graft. Petrova, prepare a strip of bovine pericardium." Dr. Petrova blinked, stunned to be addressed, to be given a direct order by a nurse. For a moment, she looked to Croft, seeking permission. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The message was clear: do what she says. Humiliation warred with a grudging, nascent respect on Petrova's face as she turned to the supply table. With the shrapnel finally isolated, Anya performed the most dangerous step. She gently grasped the fragment with the forceps. "Shields up," she said, a relic of battlefield jargon. The surgical assistant instinctively positioned a pledgeted suture shield. With a final, delicate twist, she lifted the metal shard free. It came away cleanly. A collective, inaudible sigh seemed to pass through the room. "Shard is out," she announced. Irrigation. The gaping, irregular hole it left in the aorta was terrifying. But it was a known enemy, a solvable problem. She now worked with speed. Dacron graft, 24 mm, pre-clotted. She trimmed the synthetic vessel with practiced efficiency, then began the anastomosis, the intricate process of sewing the graft to the living aorta. Her needle, a tiny silver crescent, dipped and rose, pulling a 4-0 proline suture behind it. She didn't place individual stitches, she wove a continuous, fluid line of sutures, a perfect, watertight seal that was both incredibly strong and delicate enough not to tear the fragile tissue. Croft's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, craning his neck to see her handiwork. He had performed thousands of anastomoses in his career. He prided himself on their elegance. Anya's was, to his professional eye, flawless. The spacing was perfect. The tension was uniform. It was the work of someone who had done this 100 times, not in a pristine ore, but in the sand-blasted chaos of a field tent. 35 minutes, Dr. Evans announced, his voice tight. "Brain temperature is holding at 18.5 degrees Celsius. "We're out of time," Anya said, tying off the final suture. "Graft is in place. Perfusionist, prepare for rewarming." Slow and steady. She began the meticulous process of de-airing the heart and the new graft, gently massaging the chambers to ensure no air bubbles remained to cause a catastrophic stroke. "Let's bring him back." The heart-lung machine began to hum at a higher pitch, warm blood slowly re-entering the general's frigid circulatory system. The waxy pallor of the tissues began to recede, replaced by a faint, hopeful pink. Rewarming to 32 degrees, the perfusionist called out. "Coming off bypass." The clamps were removed. The new graft filled, holding perfectly. There were no leaks. But the heart itself lay still. On the monitor, the flat green line remained. Still in asystole, a resident whispered. "It's too cold." "Give it a moment," Anya said, her eyes locked on the monitor. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Nothing. Croft stepped forward. "It's not responding. It's acidotic. He's been down too long." Then, a flicker. The green line spasmed into a jagged, chaotic scribble. "VFib." Evans shouted. "He's in ventricular fibrillation." It was a useless, quivering shudder, not a beat. It couldn't pump blood. It was the heart's last, desperate protest before giving up entirely. "Paddles," Anya ordered, her voice cutting through the rising panic. charged to 20 joules. The paddles were in her hands. She placed them directly onto the surface of the heart. Clear. The general's body convulsed as the electricity surged through his heart muscle. The chaotic line on the monitor jumped, then fell back to a dead flat line. Silence. 1 second. 2. Petrova closed her eyes, a bitter taste in her mouth. She failed. Then, a single, glorious spike on the screen. It was followed by a beep from the machine, a sound so loud in the silent room it made everyone jump. Beep. Another spike. Another beat. Beep. Slow. Hesitant. But it was there. A QRS complex. A regular rhythm. Asterisk beep. Beep. Beep, asterisk. The rhythm grew stronger, more confident. The monitor settled into a steady, life-affirming cadence. On the anesthesia display, a blood pressure reading appeared, 90/60. Color flooded back into the general's face. The anesthesiologist let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We have sinus rhythm. BP is stabilizing. Anya stepped back from the table, handing the instruments to the nurse. She looked at her work, then at the monitor, then at the faces around her. The awe was palpable. They weren't looking at a nurse. They were looking at a savior. Dr. Croft walked to the head of the table, his arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by a profound, shell-shocked respect. He leaned over, examining the new graft, the neat suture line, the strongly beating heart. He looked at Anya, and for the first time, he saw her. That anastomosis, he said, his voice a low, humbled murmur that carried across the entire or. It's textbook. It's perfect. He met her eyes. No surgeon I know could have navigated that shrapnel. How did you do that? Anya simply looked at the monitor, at the steady rhythm of the life she had just pulled back from the brink. On the battlefield, she said softly, you don't have textbooks. You just have the soldier in front of you. The silence in O3 was a living thing. It was heavier than the lead aprons, thicker than the sterile air. The only sound was the steady, metronomic pulse of the monitor, a triumphant rhythm that seemed to mock the preceding chaos. Each beep was a testament to the impossible. Anya's final words, you just have the soldier in front of you, hung in the air, a simple, profound truth that dismantled every complex ego in the room. Dr. Petrova stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hands hovering uselessly over a tray of instruments she hadn't been asked for. Her mind, usually a rapid-fire calculator of political advantage and surgical technique, was a blank slate of cognitive dissonance. A nurse. A rookie nurse had just performed a surgical masterclass that would be written about in journals. She had watched Anya's hands move with an economy of motion that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. It wasn't the work of a surgeon following a protocol, it was the work of an artist who knew their medium down to the cellular level. Petrova felt a sickening lurch in her stomach, the nauseating realization that the ladder she had been desperately climbing for years had just been rendered obsolete by someone who wasn't even in the game. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Evans, a man known for his unflappable calm, slowly removed his glasses and polished them with the hem of his scrubs. Cardiac output is excellent, he said, his voice laced with a reverence he usually reserved for discussing vintage wines. We're weaning from bypass. Vitals are rock solid. I've never seen a recovery from DHCA that clean. Not after that kind of trauma. He looked over the drape at Anya, not as a colleague, but as a student. It was Croft who finally moved. He walked around the table, his eyes tracing the path of the new graft on the imaging screen, then looking at the actual suture line on the now closed chest. He had spent his life mastering the intricate geography of the human heart, and he was now looking at a map he didn't know existed. The way you isolated the aortic root, he began, his voice raspy, a lecturer trying to deconstruct a miracle for his own understanding. You used the pericardial reflection as a natural barrier, but you did it without compromising the phrenic nerve. And that field clamp, it wasn't a clamp at all. It was a series of strategically placed sutures, a traction system. It distributed the pressure. It. He trailed off, shaking his head. It shouldn't have worked. The tissue fragility, the proximity of the spinal artery. By all rights, it should have disintegrated. It holds if you know the load-bearing points, Anya said quietly, her attention on the scrub nurse who was now helping her remove her gown and gloves. She was already transitioning back, her posture and focus shifting from commander to caregiver. Before Croft could respond, the doors to the OR swished open. Mr. Davies, the hospital administrator, stood there, his face pale but his eyes burning with an intensity no one had ever seen from him. He had been in the observation gallery, a silent witness to the entire ordeal. He held a tablet in his hand. The general's family has been updated that he is stable and in recovery, Davies announced, his voice tight. He walked directly to the center of the room, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The entire team tensed, sensing a tectonic shift in the hospital's power structure. Davies didn't look at his chief of surgery. He looked at Anya. "Nurse Sharma," he said, his tone formal. "I took the liberty of unsealing your military service records from your personnel file. It required a call to a very high-level contact at the Pentagon." A wave of confusion rippled through the room. Croft's head snapped up. Petrova's eyes widened. "Military service?" Davies swiped a finger on the tablet. "Anya Sharma. Technical Sergeant, United States Air Force. 10 years active duty." He paused, letting the words sink in. Her primary attachment wasn't to a hospital. It was to the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. A sterile instrument clattered to the floor. The name meant nothing to most of them, but Croft, who had done consulting work for the military, flinched as if struck. "She wasn't a floor nurse," Davies continued, his voice hardening as he read. "She was a Special Operations Surgical Team medic. A SOST medic. Deployed to Kandahar, Bagram, and multiple undisclosed forward operating bases. These are 6-person teams designed to conduct life-saving surgery on the battlefield, often within minutes of injury." He looked up from the tablet, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of Croft and Petrova. "Her file is filled with commendations for grace under fire and innovative field trauma techniques, including a citation for developing a novel procedure for thoracic exsanguination in austere environments." He looked directly at Anya. "A procedure logged as the Sharma field clamp maneuver. The final piece clicked into place with the force of a gunshot. The impossible calm. The radical technique. The reason she knew thorns wound. She hadn't just seen it before. She had invented the solution for it." Davies scrolled to the last page. "And there's this. A Medal of Valor commendation. For performing a 14-hour field surgery on a high-value asset, keeping him alive until evacuation was possible. The surgery involved a ruptured aortic pseudoaneurysm from embedded shrapnel." He lowered the tablet. The citation is signed by the patient himself. General Marcus Thorne. The silence that returned was one of profound, earth-shattering understanding. They weren't looking at a nurse who had gotten lucky. They were in the presence of a legend who had been hiding in plain sight. Croft staggered back a step, his hand finding the wall for support. The arrogance, the dismissal, the condescension he had shown her, it all came rushing back to him, colored by the humiliating light of this new reality. He hadn't just been wrong, he had been a fool, blinded by the uniform she wore instead of the warrior she was. Anya, however, seemed almost uncomfortable with the revelation. She met Davies's gaze, her expression unchanged. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but firm, "my only concern now is the general's post-operative care. He'll need careful monitoring for coagulopathy and neurological function." She had saved the day, been unmasked as a hero, and humbled the most powerful surgeon in the hospital. And her first thought was of the patient. In that moment, her quiet humility was more powerful than any surgical skill she had displayed. It was the ultimate validation, a quiet rebuke to the world of ego and hierarchy that had almost let a great man die. The days that followed the surgery on General Thorne were a quiet earthquake, shifting the tectonic plates of power and prestige that had defined Metropolitan General for decades. The tremors began in the hushed, sterile confines of the cardiothoracic ICU. Anya barely left the general's bedside, her focus an impenetrable shield against the whispers and stares that followed her down every corridor. She was a ghost in plain sight, a living legend the hospital staff didn't know how to address. The formal reckoning came a week later, at the weekly Morbidity and Mortality Conference. The M&M was the hospital's sanctum sanctorum, a place where failures were dissected with brutal, academic precision. The room was packed, surgeons, residents, and fellows lined the walls, drawn by the rumored showdown. Dr. Croft stood at the podium, a starkly different man from the one who had commanded the OR. The swagger was gone, replaced by a weary stoicism. His presentation was clipped, technically flawless, and devastatingly honest. He detailed the initial presentation, the failed TEVR, and the anatomical challenge of the shrapnel. Then, he paused, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. At 14:32, he began, his voice devoid of its usual booming confidence. I concluded that all surgical options were exhausted. I believed the patient's condition to be terminal. He took a breath, a moment of profound and public humility. I was wrong. He then detailed, with the precision of a convert, the procedure Anya had performed. He didn't call it the thoracic field clamp, he used the proper terminology he'd since looked up. Nurse Sharma proposed, and subsequently led, a novel aortic reconstruction utilizing deep hypothermic circulatory arrest with selective antegrade cerebral perfusion. Her technique, adapted from a battlefield protocol, allowed for a bloodless field to safely dissect the shrapnel from the aortic root and the origin of the Adamkiewicz artery, which I had deemed impossible to approach. He clicked to a post-op 3D reconstruction of the aorta, the clean lines of the graft a testament to her work. The repair is, by any standard, a masterpiece. He looked directly at Anya, who sat in the back row, her expression unreadable. I had the best training, the best equipment, and the best team. She had a memory and the courage to act on it. There is a lesson in that for all of us. He then sat down, the silence in the room a deafening roar of respect for a man who had publicly dismantled his own ego. Dr. Petrova's turn was less graceful. When questioned, she was effusive in her praise for Anya, attempting to align herself with the victory. But her opportunism was transparent, and the senior surgeons saw it for what it was. Her sycophantic maneuvering in the face of Croft's genuine contrition only served to isolate her. Her path to a prestigious fellowship at Metropolitan General was now likely a dead end. She had shown her colleagues she lacked the one non-negotiable trait in a crisis, integrity. Meanwhile, Anya's world was the quiet rhythm of the ICU. She monitored the general's slow, steady return. First came the neurological signs, a flicker of the eyelids, a response to a painful stimulus. She meticulously managed his coagulopathy, the predictable but dangerous blood-thinning effect of the bypass machine, and severe hypothermia. She oversaw the gradual weaning from the ventilator, a delicate process of encouraging his lungs to remember their function. On the third day post-op, she was checking his pupillary response when his hand twitched, his fingers curling weakly around hers. His eyes, hazy with medication, opened a fraction. He was still intubated, unable to speak, but for the first time, there was recognition. It was the truest victory yet. That evening, Administrator Davies found her in a small, empty family consultation room, staring at the city lights. "They're calling it the Sharma Protocol in the surgical department," he said, breaking the silence. "Croft is already drafting a paper. He's insisting you be listed as lead author." Anya shook her head slightly. "It's not my protocol. It belongs to a dozen medics who never made it home. I'm just the one who remembered it." "That's what makes you the one to lead," Davies said, getting to his point. "Anya, this hospital has a blind spot. We are an ivory tower of elective, specialized medicine. What you did, it exposed us. We have no integrated, rapid response trauma program for cases that fall outside the neat little boxes. I want you to build one." She looked at him, surprised. "I'm a nurse, Mr. Davies." You are a force multiplier, he corrected her. I don't want you to be a surgeon. I want you to be what you are. We'll give you a budget, a team. You'll train our surgeons, our nurses, our techs. You will create a new kind of team, one that functions with the cohesion of a SOST unit. No ego. No hierarchy. Just the mission. Save the patient. Anya thought of the quiet life she had tried to build, the anonymity she had craved after years of war. She realized now it wasn't anonymity she wanted, but purpose. The OR had felt more like home than any place she'd been in years. Here was a chance not just to use her skills, but to honor the legacy of those who had taught her. To build something that would last. Okay, she said softly. On one condition. It's not the Sharma protocol. It's the SOST protocol. The names go on the door. 2 weeks later, General Marcus Thorne was sitting up in a chair in his private room, the maze of tubes and wires replaced by a single 4-line. His voice was raspy, his body weak, but his eyes were the same sharp, intelligent steel she remembered. Anya was in the room, checking his external precautions, when he finally spoke her name, clear as a bell. Sharma. She stopped, looking up from her chart. He managed a small, tired smile. I heard them talking. About what you did. Sounds familiar. He looked at her, a lifetime of command and gratitude in his gaze. You brought me home. Again. Anya felt the last wall around her heart finally crumble. She was no longer running from her past or hiding in her present. She was a healer, forged in war and refined in peace. She had finally found a way to be both the soldier and the nurse. She returned his smile, the warmth of it reaching her eyes for the first time in a long time. Welcome home, General. Anya's story is a powerful reminder that true expertise isn't always accompanied by a fancy title. It's about the courage to act when others have given up, and the conviction to trust your unique experience, no matter who stands in your way. She proved that the quietest person in the room can be the most capable, shattering a rigid hierarchy to bring a soldier home. What did you think of Anya's bold move to take control of the OR? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of courage under fire captivated you, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more thrilling medical dramas. Remember, the most important skills we have are often the ones no one else can see.